Superpunk Corporate Meltdown is a sequential podcast. We recommend you listen to it as such to be able to follow the timeline in order as you listen. We have provided detailed notes and music credits in the show notes, and we encourage you to head over there for things like sourcing, transcripts, or other information you may want to access. Thank you.
Superpunk Corporate Meltdown is a podcast that examines workers' rights, institutional betrayal, and corporate retaliation. We trudge through the very public, tumultuous, and exhausting types of battles imposed on workers speaking out about workplace issues by employers.
Up yours, woke moralist.
Things. I'm talking to you about how to be inclusive.
This is somebody attempting to subdue what's going on.
Through a case study, we reckon with the reality and impact superpunk corporate meltdowns have on workers and culture. Spoiler alert, it's not good.
What does it say about your press releases that you're deleting them yourself?
Daddy, chill.
People are tired of being abused.
We go deep, trying to understand the points of division co-opted by abrasive leadership and the implications of retaliation for workplaces in any industry. I'm Kate Bailey, a workplace consultant and investigator.
And I'm Fanny Wandell, a hospitality workers advocate.
And this is Superpunk Corporate Meltdown.
We'll see who cancels who.
This is episode 1, Discredit and Deny. So actually the catalyst for this whole story starts with an explosive outpouring of stories about bullying, harassment, and sexual harassment from within the craft brewing industry. However, I've made a podcast about that already, and another company, and that ended very differently. Fanny is in that podcast too, as a source, as she was at the center of the Danish side of this outpouring. Brewdog was involved too, when an open letter was published by a positive change activist group called Punks with Purpose, and this letter garnered over 300 signatures, prompting a UK-wide media and public interest story that unfolded over many months. But in Superpunk Corporate Meltdown, we are not here to tell that story. Fanny, can you cover off why we're not going to go into the historical components of this story?
I'd say that there is plenty of information out there covering historical issues surrounding Brewdog already. What we'd like to do is take a look at what's happened as a reaction to those historical issues coming out and the sort of crisis management that goes on there.
A production note, just to let you know what's been going on and how long it's been going on. But seriously, when it comes to all of the companies mentioned in this broadcast, we have reached out to all parties. For Brewdog and Wiser especially, we also provided a 35-page document detailing the factual claims in our podcast and describing discussion points. We invited them to respond to anything that they wanted to discuss from that document, as well as the questions that we asked. We gave them nearly 7 days and indicated we were open any time to discuss any of this with them. Apart from one journalist whose reply we included in the broadcast, no party has responded to our invitation to reply. We're now going to formally introduce Charlotte Cook. Charlotte Cook is a brewer, writer, and highly esteemed member of the brewing community in the UK and abroad. Charlotte is a former employee of Brewdog. Charlotte is not a founding member of Punks with Purpose, but after becoming a signatory on the open letter, she joined the democratically designed group on June 10, 2021. For Charlotte, this is the catalyst for what has been over a year of being directly targeted by the company, doxed by the company, and subjected to a total invasion of her privacy and life. This has resulted in her making multiple reports with police and coming to the platform, with which we have been able to provide further coverage, legal advice, and support to her, along with many other people on the platform experiencing the same pressures. The first topic of discussion with Charlotte is in relation to the historical issues that she had had with the company. There are two notable experiences that I think are worth addressing before we go further into this podcast, and those relate to two notable incidences that you've had with this company. Could you tell us a little bit about the first experience that you had, which involved you being sexually harassed while working with the company?
The first instance of sexual harassment took place in a Brewdog bar. It was committed by a member of staff from a third company, Cicerone, who'd come over to administer exams, certified Cicero exams at Brewdog. They came along to our Christmas party and basically just stood outside of the toilets in this Brewdog bar, waiting for women to go past and then asking them to have sex with them in the toilet. This person had hold of the sleeve of my jacket and didn't want to let go. I had to kind of pull away. They were quite insistent. I had zero interest in wanting to sleep with this person and also wouldn't have wanted to do it on work premises, and felt really intimidated and scared because this is a person in a position of power. They're there to administer exams. They can help decide where people go further in their career. And I reported it to an HR representative at Brewdog. They said that it would be dealt with. I've later seen the documents that show that this HR representative contacted Cicerone to say that he'd behaved inappropriately with members of staff. I think this goes a little bit beyond inappropriate, but they were declining to go into the details about what had happened. So I reported sexual harassment to Brewdog of a third party. Brewdog declined to fully report that. I was also offered absolutely no support afterwards, and it stuck with me for years. This individual was actually fired. Well, they were invited to tender their resignation in May of last year or June of last year after it had been investigated fully, as it should have been at the time. But Brewdog, they had their entire role in this. They just skipped along. They didn't acknowledge any responsibility, and they haven't been implicated whatsoever. And I think that's wrong. I think people should know that this happened at Brewdog. This individual is one of the first and the biggest heads to roll after Brienne Allen started posting allegations of sexism in the beer industry. And if their head rolled, then why is nobody's head rolling at Brewdog? Because they're equally as culpable.
Do you think it speaks to the culture of the company that the concerns you raised with them weren't seen as severe as we understand them to be now?
Entirely. It's the fact that Brewdog could have done a full investigation. They could have found out what had happened. Instead, they decided to not even tell this person's employer the full extent of what had happened. And yeah, that's it. Brush it under the carpet. Doesn't matter. It's over and done with. He won't come back, so problem solved. And it's not problem solved because you've got people who are left with trauma. Because it is quite traumatizing to have somebody speak to you in that way, to be put in that position where there's a bigger, more powerful person, both socially within the industry and physically, in front of you asking you to do something, then you say no. They can take their revenge if they want to. And Brewdog did absolutely nothing to help. No support, no counselling, no even, are you okay? It was just brushed under the carpet, and I think that's appalling, and it speaks to the culture that was there. The thing that seemed to be more important there was to maintain the relationship between Cicerone and Brewdog rather than look after Brewdog staff.
So you also had another experience with the company when there were comments left about you on a company social media platform from when you worked there, and you went on to write an article about that. Could you elaborate further on this?
So back in the day, Brewdog would use pictures of the staff to post on social media, particularly Facebook, to encourage interaction between customers and fans and the company. One particular picture had me holding up a bottle of beer, and the caption said, "What should we do to celebrate the launch of this beer?" And a person posted, a member of the public posted saying, "Have her drink it topless." I thought that this was wrong. I went to HR and I went to the social media person and asked them to remove it. Probably the next day, I was approached in person by the head of HR and I was told that they weren't going to take it down and that what I should do instead is stand up for myself online. I should engage with these people. I should say, hey, that's not okay. I should go be a spunky, angry little girl and stand up for myself. In the company handbook, it says that nobody should be subject to any kind of harassment. To me, this is extreme harassment, and it happens in work and it happens on a public work platform as well. And nothing was done. I also didn't feel that it was safe for me to engage with these people, because if they're willing to say that when I haven't tried to antagonize them by saying, hey, that's not okay, what are they going to say when I have? And why is it okay for the head of HR to put me in a position that's going to put me into greater danger? It just made absolutely no sense. So I wrote an article about it because I read a LinkedIn post from the CEO that said that he took full responsibility for everything that happened at the company and that the buck stopped with him. I also talked about it on Woman's Hour on the BBC, so several million people have heard this story as well. And silence, absolute silence.
So I guess that both of those experiences speak to cultural problems ultimately that you have been subjected to, and which I guess when you refer to the CEO taking responsibility, that's referring to they're taking responsibility for historical issues, but also what your stories there indicate is that at a certain point, the company just doesn't care and they're just not going to do anything about it.
Certainly seems that way to me. After Equity Punks posted on the Equity Punk forum about this, I did eventually get an apology. It was an apology from the CEO. It was an apology from a female member of the HR team. And my response was, thank you for your apology. I feel this is a genuine apology from you, but you shouldn't have to apologize. And the fact that a woman is apologizing to another woman about the culture and actions of men just proves to me that absolutely nothing has changed. And I was actually very disheartened to get that apology.
And with that, we now finally begin our timeline in Superpunk Corporate Meltdown. Fanny, can you kick us off with filling us in a little bit about what's been happening for you at around the time our timeline kicks off, which is January 2022?
So a big part of what I did last year was community outreach, and much of this took place on Instagram. Back then, I wasn't really focusing on Brewdog, but actually a different brewery. I had just seen a bit about Brewdog on the sidelines for a few months prior. And while I was on one of my serious deep dives, I came across a video of Brewdog's CEO, which I subsequently shared, and it was immediately reshared across other platforms as well. And it led to former and current staff engaging with me. I also heard from a journalist working for the BBC who informed me of the documentary they were producing. So I ended up connecting some of those writing me to both resources and media, much like I did with the issues surrounding McKellar.
Gotcha. So just one thing I'm personally curious about, is that normal for a journalist or media to reach out to you in these types of situations? What's the sort of status quo there?
That's something I've encountered nearly every single time I've spoken with a journalist, no matter how big or small the story is. Even prior to my engagement with the beer community, back when I was hounding Danish politicians about meeting bar owners to discuss the application of pandemic restrictions, it's something I've observed to be common practice.
And speaking of moving through the story, we're ready to get started. Let's go back to January 2022.
In the days leading up to the airing of a highly anticipated BBC documentary, The Truth About Brewdog, the company's CEO published numerous statements across several platforms, including Brewdog shareholders' online community, the Equity for Punks Forum, and LinkedIn. These statements varied in tone and messaging, often focusing on critiquing journalistic efforts from the BBC, casting doubt over the reliability of their sources, predominantly former staff, addressing claims which were expected to be in the broadcast, and citing the company's recent culture review from Wiser, an award-winning creative and recruitment company, as a testament to recent change in the company culture. After the release of the documentary, the CEO repeatedly stated that the allegations made were totally false and announced Brewdog's intention to take legal action against the BBC.
Here is Charlotte Cook's reaction to the allegations that began circulating from the company and the CEO.
When I first saw the accusations of us having ulterior motives to participate in the BBC documentary posted by the CEO on the Equity Punks forum, at first I was scared because we were identifiable in those, and it made allegations against our character, allegations against our reasoning for doing this, and various things like that. But I had to take a little step back and kind of think about it and look at it and think, you know what, if this is the response, this is a scared response, this is somebody attempting to subdue what's going on, this is somebody trying to make other people feel as scared as they are so that they don't speak their truth. And it just made me think, I have to hold fast, I've got to do this. It just made me double in my resolve, and guess what? Intimidation doesn't work, buddy.
In February 2022, Brewdog CEO made further statements regarding the veracity of BBC's reporting.
Hand in Heart launched the Brewdog Affected Workers platform in order to assist Punks with Purpose with their core mission to change the culture at Brewdog by providing a platform for current and former employees to register their experiences. By mid-February, several participants of the BBC documentary The Truth About Brewdog had been approached by private investigators and were seeking recourse.
So I want to touch very quickly on why Hand in Heart teamed up with Punks with Purpose. Hand in Heart is actually my company, and it's also a media publisher, which is how you're listening to this podcast. And this is the second occasion that we have used our resources as workplace consultants and investigators to help individuals confronting historical issues with workplaces. And we do that to better position the workers and the company for rehabilitation, autonomy, and hopefully a better work culture for current and future employees. As the leader of this company, it is my choice to offer these things to workers. And that is because I'm just simply passionate about seeing workplaces change for the better. And I'm really tired of seeing a lack of initiative from businesses and leaving all of that work to the workers. Through the events of craft beer over the last year, many of us loosely and socially connected, sharing experiences or just honestly checking in on each other. This was true when it came to members of the positive action group Punks with Purpose. We began more serious talks about if their expectations of accountability from Brewdog had been met and what they could do to have the experiences of former and current workers addressed. We came up with the concept for the platform, the Brewdog Affected Workers platform. We wanted to create a space for affected Brewdog workers to independently register their experiences with the company, to assist Punks with Purpose in their core mission of tackling Brewdog's cultural issues through positive action and advocating for the mistreated and affected employees across the globe. A huge part of launching a platform like this is actually to also help verify the number of genuine cases. What tends to happen when a company is accused of a bad culture, and that is usually reflected in many more than one worker coming forward with issues, and it also is likely infused with social media. It often sparks a debate about, well, are they telling the truth? What's real? How can that be real? And when we help to verify the number of genuine cases, we're able to establish the landscape of complaints and ascertain key data, such as how many cases are there? What kind of complaints are there? This would form a basis from which we could decide how to proceed. We could initiate discussions with the company. We could put individuals in touch with professionals. We could seek recourse with regulatory bodies. You don't really know what you can do until you know what has gone on or what has allegedly gone on and what can be investigated. And that really brings in the final element, which is safety. There needs to be safety for all involved, people who used to work at the company, people currently work at the company, and anyone who could be impacted by this information. By establishing the platform, we could ensure that for all stakeholders and be able to hopefully generate some positive, meaningful momentum into having the issues addressed. We're now going to check back in with Charlotte Cook. On February 8th, alongside Hand in Heart, Punks with Purpose took the next step in their efforts, especially in light of the fallout from the BBC documentary, to have the company address the issues that were raised in their original letter. Now, Charlotte, you're not a founder of Punks with Purpose. Also, the way the group is organized is that generally there's a collective response to everything. However, I wanted to ask if you're able to discuss a little bit about what was happening at the time of the platform launch and what the hope was in moving forward with the platform as a concept.
As a group, we've been approached by so many people asking for help. Punks with Purpose don't have any resources. All we have is a website and a Twitter account and a few brains who can try and put things together to help people. So we saw the sheer volume of people who were asking for help, who wanted their stories told, but who also just wanted it to be acknowledged that what had happened to them had happened to them, that they were being gaslit, that these things had actually happened. And the hope with the platform was that we could provide them with a professional, third-party, dispassionate platform where they could say what's happened to them, and then somebody is going to go to the people that they are terrified of and ask for an apology on their behalf. One of the things that we've always been faced with is that we're doing this for money. I haven't made a penny out of Punks with Purpose, and I don't think that anybody else has either. And People just want an apology. They want a real, genuine apology that isn't conveyed to them via a radio show, that isn't written down on a social media post. They want somebody who caused them harm to say, yes, this happened, I believe you, I'm sorry, and it's not going to happen again. That's all anybody wants. And the hope with the platform was that that would happen.
On March 2nd, Brewdog published a press release containing a summary of the report filed to UK's communications regulator, Ofcom, regarding the BBC documentary The Truth About Brewdog. Brewdog details a list of key points in their complaint, ranging from inaccuracies regarding their trading days, cost of private air travel, Brewdog's lost forest, and the CEO's personal investments. The list continues to include details of sources from the documentary, who are made identifiable by those details despite being anonymized in the report. All former staff were anonymized aside from one, Charlotte Cook, who was named as a de facto researcher, evidence gatherer, and participation encourager on behalf of the BBC. A quote begins to circulate across multiple platforms and media, and its source remains unclear as people continue to ask for it to be clarified. Hand and Heart has preliminary discussions with Wiser and Brewdog regarding a potential reconciliation program, as the affected workers platform continues to register cases. So at this point, you're in touch with Wiser and Brewdog, right? What's going on there?
Yes. So we announced the platform, that was February 8th. And then from that date, like over the next week, I just got absolutely bodied by people on LinkedIn. I mean, it was an insane amount of people, because I'm one of those idiots that pays for premium. And one of the things that you get with that is like you can see who looked at your profile, which, by the way, becomes a very good perk a little later on as well. But anyway, so what I can see is that all of a sudden, from all over the UK, I've got HR managers, I've got HR consultants, I've got journalists, I've got representatives from Wiser, which was the company that did Brewdog's review, and as well people from Brewdog. Now, what I thought was best, given that my LinkedIn was like a few months old, I'm not popular on there, and this spike in interest was obviously related to the announcement. I contacted some of those people that were viewing my profile and said, hey, if you'd like to know more about me or my company, or you think you can help in this situation, let's set up a meeting. One rep from Wiser did that. And that subsequent meeting consisted of me reiterating the purpose of the program and that these issues are open, but we invite contact and initiative from the company if they'd like to step in and find a way to solve these issues. But, this is what we're working on. So basically, that was my final suggestion to this rep from Wiser was, well, if the company wants to do something about it, let's facilitate that. This representative arranges a meeting with themselves and 2 C-levels at Brewdog, and I presented to them, briefly, but, a pretty comprehensive portrait of where things were at, again, reiterating the purpose of the platform, what we're working on, and that, ultimately people were coming forward because they wanted to see the culture change for the better. The company recognized a lot of it and expressed very strongly and multiple times a desire to resolve the issues. And, the actual outcome of that meeting was that they expressed an interest in some sort of a reconciliation style concept. And that would be the investigation of the matters and then the subsequent mediation of an agreement or outcome based on what were substantiated experiences. So, that's where we left that meeting, and that's what myself and the team did in terms of activities for the platform. We went about assessing, based on the cases, how a company like this could address these historical and current claims under a reconciliation framework. And we also, during this time, were speaking at length with participants about what terms were important for them to consider this sort of a solution and what would help them to feel safe about entering into this kind of an agreement with the company. So really, that's how I got in contact with Wiser and Brewdog, and that's where the platform was heading into March. Then this thing happened, right? Like literally spawned from a swamp. We don't know. And for the listeners, Fanny, please, what on God's green earth is Quotegate?
Well, Quotegate
took place over the course of about a month, and it provided this really fascinating layer to everything else going on at the time. You had the Ofcom report, which was pretty alarming given how former staff and documentary participants were affected by it. You had the Guardian working on publishing their piece about the CEO of BrewDog hiring private investigators. You had the affected workers platform participants requesting information. You had the preliminary talks between Hand and Heart, BrewDog, and Wiser. And then between all of that, there was this quote that I became really curious about, and it was an issue that I was really able to focus in on. So it was a quote that was repeated across multiple platforms and media and had morphed a little bit here and there. Then there was the fact that this quote had an unclear source, and at times it was attributed to different people. It felt like something that should have been really easy to have clarified given how many times it had been published, and the fact that BrewDog is this big company. With me being the little idealist that I am, I figured that they would want their quotes and sources to be completely bulletproof. So to me, it was really simple. Hey, BrewDog, this quote that you continue to bolster your argument with, where is it from? And so this was a really safe topic that everyone could weigh in on without legal ramifications, because it was something that was within the public sphere. And after repeated attempts to get an answer, it became this sort of mini phenomenon, full of excellent memes, by the way, where many people started to inquire about it because I think it raised a lot of red flags for some. It's always the questions that people avoid that are the most interesting.
Yeah, it kind of ties in with this overall experience that you never know what is going to kind of take a life of its own in these things. So, Fanny, first of all, when did you become aware of the quote? And what is the quote?
So I first became aware after having it pointed out to me by someone reading through my stories when I shared the summary of BrewDog's complaint to Ofcom. It's an 8-page report, and at first I was pretty fixated by how brutal this summary was to BBC's sources for their documentary, but this is arguably the most defamatory version of the quote that exists, and it goes like this. We, in particular, quoted the view of an independent third party. There are always ex-employees that have left the business and feel mistreated or unjustly defeated. That being said, this has been the most extreme case we've seen of a small group of former employees on a mission to cause damage to a brand, and that there had definitely been a small group of people who had a personal vendetta against the CEO, willing to go to all lengths to take down BrewDog. Then this quote kept resurfacing in different ways, both in articles and statements put out by the CEO of BrewDog.
Here's where it really gets interesting with this quote, however, is because this was not the only place the quote appeared. In fact, different iterations of the quote appeared in many different locations said by different people at different times across the course of this campaign to discredit former workers. Here's one such quote from the Scottish Sun on the same day, March 2, 2022. An independent report by a workplace consultancy concluded last year that BrewDog was the target of the most extreme case of a small group of former employees on a mission to cause damage to a brand. It appears again in an Insider article from March 3rd, 2022. The former Asda chief executive, brought in as a non-executive chair to mentor the CEO and tackle the toxic workplace culture, responded to the report by stating that BrewDog was the target of the most extreme case we've seen of a small group of former employees on a mission to cause damage to a brand. And then it appears in the CEO's post on LinkedIn. This has been the most extreme case we've seen of a small group of former employees on a mission to cause damage to a brand. There's definitely been a small group of people who have a personal vendetta against the CEO and is willing to go to all lengths to take down BrewDog. What's notable about those quotes that I read out, even though they're much the same, is that they're attributed to different people and repurposed and recycled for various uses. And the implication is strong that this was a campaign and a conspiracy that was focused on the CEO of this company, and that this campaign was focused on causing damage to that individual and the company. For me, though, it was the circulation of this quote that just sent my red flags into overdrive, because I knew the people coming forward on the platform didn't have these intentions. They weren't participating in activities like that. It just wasn't the case. It wasn't marrying up with the reality of everyone else's experience. So, Fanny, you obviously begun to look into this. Can you detail where you found this quote historically? Like, how far back did it go?
At this point, I had seen the Ofcom review. I had noticed versions of the quote with different sources assigned to it, and I had seen the CEO of BrewDog remind his community of his own use of this quote. It became really simple. Despite the quote varying, there was still common wording, which was, in this case, the term most extreme case. So it took a quick search within the shareholders community, and I found what seems to be the very first use of this quote. This is from all the way back on January 24th, which is pretty significant. It's the day that the BBC documentary aired, and actually, this was shared just a few hours before the broadcast. Here is how that version goes. It should be noted, in the review process, Weiser told our teams that this is the most extreme case they have seen of a small group of former employees having such a loud voice when the majority of data from current employees paints a different picture. We also don't understand why a fair and balanced program purporting to be about our culture failed to reach out to the independent third party that was charged with reviewing it. And I'm sure I'll remind everyone of this again at some point, but I just need to highlight that the quote I just read indicates that this opinion was provided while the culture review being conducted by Weiser was still underway.
So I guess the other the side of any gate that exists is the community element, right? The community public interest element. How is the community reacting to this?
In terms of how it hit the community, I think this issue resonated very similarly with a lot of people. This is a massive company. It's a CEO and co-founder with a lot of power, resources, and reach. It seemed incredulous and just wrong that a company of this magnitude was able to genuinely mass communicate this message to their 100,000 plus shareholders, to the CEO's 300,000 plus followers on LinkedIn, his 100,000 followers on Twitter, the BrewDog website, and then the press release, which was further published within the media. But then, despite them being responsible for all this output, BrewDog were still unable to give a direct answer as to who this quote came from and what this opinion was based off of. So yeah, I would say that the community in general was pretty sussed out, rightfully so.
I think that point you raise of mass communication is so important. And it's totally indicative of a company's resources, right? When they have access to media to proliferate something that they're saying unquestioned. And if they have access to a community of people who, for the most part, already like them, and then a company is able to essentially insinuate through mass communication that, in this case, those who were coming forward were doing so based on personal vendettas. So then it also becomes about entitlement over a worker's right to the truth and to the legitimization of a truth, right? Investigation. And in this case, with no cases having been investigated substantially in any way, to reduce the stories to this idea that it was all based, like all these stories from across the world are all based on a personal vendetta, and then attribute the quote in question to the result of an independent review process and say, well, it's Weiser said this in our review process, and then come out later and muddy the waters with who said it and when. It just doesn't add up. And I can see why the community took interest in that. While I can definitely see and say that incompetence plays a role here, I do think that the elements of this that I guess are most important were purposeful and were intentional. And it was ultimately purposeful and intentional to want to put that sentiment about former workers out into the public. And to do so, historically, over time, indicates that it was a subtle choice because they knew that it was wrong, or they didn't have the evidence to outright come and present this to the public. This, to me, tells me, right, that there are cultural problems in an organization. Culture is really the umbrella under which many things happen to people. It is the dark matter in which everyone is enveloped, and that can be good or bad. So when there is a subtle, consistent effort to mass communicate a sentiment that no one in the organizations involved can agree on said it and when, I'd say that there's a huge cultural problem outside of the fact that based on the reception in the community, it was quite offensive to people, many, many people, not just those accused.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on how subtle it was because, the Ofcom review was about 8 pages. And I think everyone, including myself, was so captivated by the way that they had directly gone after certain sources within the documentary that this took a little while to sink in, this quote, because it's only 2 sentences in an 8-page report. But then it was because of the repetition that Quotegate kind of became a thing.
This is another topic that we checked in with Charlotte about. Charlotte, can you discuss your experiences at the time that Quotegate first reared its very confusing and ugly head?
So when this quote first came out, I was made aware of it on the Equity Punks forum, on the BBC Ofcom complaint, and also in a Business Insider article. It subtly changed every time because, that's how quotes work. They change, they evolve, they change attribution. So when I first saw it, my original thought was utter disbelief because there's no way that anybody that has spoken to anyone who is a former or current worker at Brewdog could come to that conclusion from the interviews that I've heard about. My first thought was the CEO is back to posting nonsense on LinkedIn, made up things. And I found it disconcerting, but also really funny.
I guess there's that element of absurdity to it because the implication was, I guess, designed to cast a shadow over punks with purpose and specifically people who had been identified like yourself. And this was really the first iteration of it that was in the public purview, but it goes back quite far historically. And I guess I also just want to check in that the people you were connected with at that time, were they sort of having the same reaction as you, or was there a spectrum of reactions?
Absolutely everybody that I spoke to found it absurd. There was no context to it. There was no proof that we saw that this had ever happened or that anybody had actually ever said this. And the fact that it changed so frequently, that just also made it seem like it was just being trotted out, not verbatim, just as and when, thinking that nobody's ever going to call me out on this because why would they? I'm making a terrible accusation. I think everyone found it as absurd as I did.
Were you surprised that the community ultimately drove, I guess, an inquest into the origin of the quote?
I think that everyone could see how absurd it was, and the fact that there was a blanket refusal to actually deal with the attribution of the quote meant that people really wanted to push. They asked for clarification, no clarification was given, and, we're tenacious little bastards, so we're going to find out where it's come from. And I think it's utterly preposterous that Brewdog could claim, Wiser cleared this up. It's still not fully clear where any of this information came from. This is just the power of people demanding truth, that they're not going to sit and listen to nonsense and lies and be perfectly happy to accept that that's what it is. They're going to ask for the truth. If they're not satisfied that what they've been told is the truth is actually the truth, they're going to keep pushing and they're going to keep asking and they're going to continue to dismantle any mistruth until they get to the bottom of it.
So, Charlotte, speaking of Quotegate and the Ofcom complaint, that was a complaint where you specifically were singled out and named. How did that feel to see that?
When I first saw it, I was very chilled, and I thought it was really terrifying to be named in a press release that had potential implications. But it was filled with untruths. I wasn't a de facto researcher for the BBC. I had genuinely very little input towards everything like that. I reread it and I kind of just realized that it was a juvenile, ridiculous piece of bullying nonsense, and I wasn't going to give it the time of day. It was a waste of my time to even think about it anymore, other than to laugh at it and be, is that the best you can do?
Yes. And you did actually take a more formal step in regards to that Ofcom complaint, and you registered it with the police.
Yeah, I sent that to the police and kept it as part of the ongoing paper trail that I've got of harassment. Everything that I've ever felt that has made me feel fear and made me feel worried for my safety, be that physical or mental, I've recorded with the police.
Discredit and deny. A method, a mechanism of the superpunk corporate machine. We're going to end episode 1 here. And on the next episode, we're going to delve deeper into this story. So strap in, because these cultural problems take a dark and ominous turn. It's a full-on super punk corporate meltdown. If you love this music, then that means you love Amanda, who made this music. Check the show notes for details, and you'll find full credits there also. Thank you.